hope that we can.
Yeah, me too. And hello, everybody else. You're more than welcome to chat with us. We're just building community before our program starts. Catching up with an old PAFA docent.
Yes.
Docent emeritus now. You get to keep that title forever.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm very proud of it. In fact,
good.
I'm doing Friday, I'm doing a book report at the Cos Club, and we are talking about a book that basically had a lot to do with the barns. And it's a novel, but a sort of sensationalized novel based on barns. And one of the things that I dug up from my files from 2012 talks about how Blackens et al. And Carls put together got the show, the first show that Barnes did, which caused all the hoopla. So I'm going to, I was just so glad that I saved those files, because there was all that information and I could pass it on now to other people 10 years later. It's kind of a cool thing.
Oh, that's great. Oh, and I see Tammy, potentially our most enthusiastic attendee of PAFA programs. I like seeing who comes early and who comes to everything, and it's kind of knowing our audience. Hi, Tammy. Look at that enthusiasm. Oh, more old friends. Hi, Nancy Heller. Shana, if you really want to know what this is going to be like, you should have a private chat with Nancy Heller. She was last week's Art at Noon speaker.
Oh my goodness, I need all the intel. Monica, I'm happy to see Laura Turner-Igo. I don't know if you're familiar with Laura. She is...
I do know Laura.
Oh, okay.
Hi, it's been a while, but yeah.
Hi Monica. Hi, Shana. How are you guys doing?
Laura.
Missed you too.
Thanks
I'm
for
looking
coming.
forward to this. Of course.
Oh, great.
I have your book, Shana, too, at home. I'm at work, so I can't.
Yeah, I was wondering where you
were. Up here.
I believe you. You don't need the evidence. I'm just flattered that you even have it.
Of course.
I think a lot more people are going to have it after today, Shana.
Yeah, maybe. I hope so. Laura, have you collaborated with PAFA at all in your museum?
I've given some talks at PAFA recently, and also while I was a graduate student too at Temple. So yeah. I know and love PAFA, and it's wonderful virtual programs.
Well, thank you. I'm trying to remember, Laura, what program did you give spotlight tours for? What exhibition was it?
That was Anatomy Academy, which was a long time ago.
I knew it was something about like 10-ish years ago.
Yeah.
But I couldn't remember which exact project.
Yeah, and I've given an Art at Noon talk too about William Rush. And I was involved in some of the Scoop Little Hudson programming too.
That's right. Once you become a friend of PAFA, you keep you around as long as possible.
Can't complain.
Oh, so many old friends signing on. I am going to give us a minute or two because it is noon and we do find people, they will miss the introduction of why you are speaking with us today if I start precisely at
No
noon.
worries.
So everybody who's on this call, you have probably 90 to 120 more seconds if you like forgot to get a cup of tea or whatever it is that you might need, because I don't want to start until we have a few more folks on the call. All right. All right, featured speaker, how do you feel about me getting us started right now? Feel ready? Okay. Well, welcome everybody. It's so nice to see all of your faces. For our last Art at Noon of the season, for those of you I have not met before, I am Monica Zimmerman, our Vice President of Public Education, Engagement, and Museum Operations. And I am standing in for Abby King, who's been running this series so beautifully for the last 2 years during the pandemic. You will see her come back again in the spring. She's going to resume running this program from her new digs in a new country. So look forward for those announcements coming somewhere around February. I also want to make sure and give a big shout out to all the loyal audience that shows up for this every week. And those of you who are members and sponsors, we're just so grateful to have this space, to have community and to have it be free and to have an audience that keeps coming and discussing big questions with us on a weekly basis. It's really gratifying. And I also want to give a big thank you to the Barron family, who, as many of you know, sponsors the entire fall season of our Art at Noon programming in memory of Rose Susan Hirshhorn Barron, who was a former docent at the Academy many years ago and a big supporter of its educational programs, particularly Art at Noon. And so this series is in memory of her by the family. Before I hand things over to our esteemed speaker today, a few quick points of business, as you are used to. As we always do, you will see there's a little red light flashing on the top of your screen. We are recording this. We will post it to our YouTube channel so that it remains evergreen and available to anyone, anytime. Look for that to go up in a couple of days. We try to get it up pretty fast. And we will try to leave time at the end for questions. As you all well know, sometimes we do it, sometimes we have time, sometimes we don't, but we're going to try. But feel free to drop any questions that occur to you as we go in the chat. And when we get to the Q&A, if it's helpful, I'll try to round up some of those questions for Dr. Klein to answer as a group. So you can seed the Q&A as we go if you're interested. As you probably also know, today is our last Art at Noon of the season. Hooray, happy holidays, whatever holiday you might be celebrating in the month of December. And we will be back in February with a new lineup of incredible talks. But we're closing out our series with an incredible talk by scholar Shana Klein, who it is now my pleasure to introduce to you. So Dr. Klein is a professor at Kent State University. Oh, the beauties of Zoom that we get to hang out with Dr. Klein from across state borders, and holds a PhD in art history from the University of New Mexico. There she completed the dissertation and now book, The Fruits of Empire, Art, Food, and the Politics of Race in the Age of American Expansion. And her book demonstrates really how pictures of food were not mere decoration, but a platform for artists and viewers to discuss heated debates over race and citizenship. Dr. Klein has been awarded several fellowships for her research at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, Georgia O'Keefe Museum, among others. And she has presented her research in a number of peer-reviewed journals and podcasts, and teaches classes that bring together American art, material culture, and social justice, a wonderfully interdisciplinary approach to topics that is right in line with what we're trying to do here at PAFA. And very exciting news, just this past Friday, after Dr. Klein was scheduled to present to us anyway, her book of the same name, The Fruits of Empire, won a major award last Friday. So she won the 2021 Southeastern College Art Conference Award for Excellence in Scholarly Research and Publication. So congratulations, Dr. Klein, that is a big deal. And the rest of you, I know you're in for a treat. So without further ado, congratulations, Dr. Klein. Welcome to PAFA, and we're so excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much. First, let me extend my gratitude to Abby and Monica, and of course, Anne Marley, who, Anna's just like the staple of PAFA in my mind. She really drives the institution, and it's, one of the most major museums for scholars in my field. So I'm so honored to have this opportunity. And I'll also tell you, it never gets less awkward hearing yourself being introduced by someone else. It's just something that I'm still getting used to, but thank you for the accolades. And I am really excited and proud to have recently won this award. And I'm going to share some of my book research with you today. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Let's see, let me enlarge it. How does this look to everyone? Can you give me a thumbs up, Monica?
It looks beautiful.
Okay, great. All right, so let's dive in. This talk today is called The Fruits of Empire, Art, Food, and Racism, a pretty straightforward, direct title that draws again from my research. And the book that I wrote is essentially designed to show that depictions of food were not just delicious to look at, they were not just fun to paint, that they also reflected national attitudes and ambitions to expand the American empire. And so fruit uniquely expressed and pressed upon some of these ideas because where fruit was grown was in contested spaces, spaces considered to be borderlands and frontiers. And who grew fruit were also the targets of racism. So often fruit growers were people of color or immigrant laborers. And so my project looks at how fruit tapped into national debates about citizenship and the racial formation of the country. The project that is my book is pretty expansive in that it requires a look at where fruit is grown. So in California to Florida to as far as Hawaii, these are regions that are historically overlooked by scholars of American art. My project is also pretty expansive in terms of the visual culture and the material culture that I study. So I'm not just looking at, capital A fine art painting. I'm looking at advertisements and photographs and cookbook literature. So I have 5 book chapters that are each organized by specific fruit case studies. So I have a chapter on the grape, orange, watermelon, banana, and pineapple. And these are the fruits that I found to be the most visible in American depictions of food. They are also certainly some of the most politically charged foods that tap into national attitudes about race and expansion. So I figured I'd use the next 35, 40 minutes or so to walk you through some of my research, starting with my first chapter on grapes. So I'm taking you to Philadelphia, maybe where many of you are today, to think about the Mammoth Mission grapevine. This was declared to be the largest grapevine in the world at the time in 1876 that was shipped from Santa Barbara, California to Philadelphia for the World's Fair. And it was so large and it was so kind of chunky and huge that it had to be sectioned off into different packages to then be transported to the Philadelphia Centennial. And when it was displayed there, people were in awe. They were so impressed at this large grapevine coming from California. And this was basically an advertisement for the new and burgeoning California grape and wine industry. So today we're so accustomed to thinking about wine country and Napa Valley in California, but the Center for Grapes had not always been in California. Previous to California, it was in Ohio, where I currently live. And before that, it was in New York. So this advertisement was necessary to kind of declare the new center for American grapes to be in California, to accompany this new industry. And so it was put on display. It was adorned with these agricultural diplomas and certificates that showed the possibilities of moving out west, that demonstrated the profitable possibilities of investing in this business and drinking California wines and growing California grapes. World's Fair venues were really central to showcasing innovations in food and technology. And so it makes sense that a little less than 20 years later, we see another exhibition for California grapes and wine. This time it's at the Columbian Exposition in Chicago. So this is visited by even more people. Thousands and thousands of viewers are getting their eyes on this display. And here I really think is where the relationship between art, grapes, and empire is the most explicit. So we're looking at an illustration of that display at the Columbian Expo. We have this panoramic view of the San Francisco Bay. It's sitting underneath a banner that states, "Westward, the star of empire takes its way." Okay, so in this case, that star of empire is the California grape. It's California wine. And we see shelves of wine underneath that panoramic picture. It's also illustrated with statistics that were flaunting how profitable the business was. It's also accompanied by quotations that are from the Bible that are meant to display the virtues of grapes and wine and to distance it from its reputation for, being intemperate. And so this display really exhibited California grapes as a method, as a device for kind of civilizing the Western frontier. And horticulturists and vintners were very direct about grapes being a colonial device. In their manuals and in their advertisements, they talked about how installing vineyards in California was a way to civilize the Western frontier. That by growing grapes and creating vineyards in California, it was a way to transform, to create more sophistication in a wilderness that was considered to be savage. And to grow and colonize land was part of the mission of California grape growing. Land, by the way, that was historically stolen from indigenous people and later Mexican Californios. And so this first chapter is that introduction, thinking about how fruit wasn't so innocent or straightforward, but that even growing fruit was this colonial strategy to colonize land or to claim territory and to come at it with a kind of a perspective to dominate it in some sense. Now I can show you dozens of paintings and World's Fair exhibits and photographs of California grapes. It's much harder to identify and find depictions of people actually cultivating or stomping on grapes. And this is an exception. So we're looking at a print by Paul Franzeni for Harper's Weekly, which maybe many of you know was a popular journal in the 1800s. It widely circulated. And this print shows people stomping grapes on a California vineyard. In some ways, it's pretty historically accurate in that it shows that many grape growers and people stomping and picking grapes were Chinese laborers. It was a huge Asian labor force. Now, when Franzeni prints this illustration in 1878, soon after, people launch racist remarks in regards to this print, saying to the effect that they, quote, don't want to see Chinese celestials stomping American grapes with their, quote, filthy feet. Okay, so I'm taking this pregnant pause on purpose. I want that to really sink in, right? That this print inspired people to complain and launch racist remarks that they don't want to see Chinese people stomping American grapes with their filthy feet. So again, I use this first chapter to introduce readers to the idea that something as small as a grape is actually very racially loaded, it's very racially charged. And that fruit had this unique ability to kind of inspire debates over who should have the privilege, who has the purity, who has the cleanliness to cultivate America's fruitlands. So this is my first chapter on California grapes. For my second chapter, I transport readers to Florida to think about the Florida orange industry. And this is certainly a more optimistic chapter than my first chapter on grapes, because the orange industry was quite inclusive in comparison to other industries. It was inclusive of women, it was inclusive of African Americans. And I feel like when people pick up my book, this is something I talk about with my colleagues, I think they're going to jump to the chapters on the pineapple or the banana. These are like, you know, flashier, kind of like more tropical fruits maybe. But the orange chapter is actually my most favorite chapter. And this is where I think I make some of the most interesting discoveries, because it's not Southerners who jump-started the Florida orange industry. It's actually Northerners. So Northerners moved south after the Civil War, and they are helping to establish a new orange industry. And they are seeing this as promising a new chapter for the South in the era of Reconstruction. And Northerners are taking advantage of the Homestead Act, so laws that sold Southern land at cheaper prices to migrants. And so they're moving south, they're buying land at cheaper prices, and they're hoping to transform the South, to help rehabilitate it after the Civil War, and using oranges to do so, to create a new economy around a new good that had not been cotton or tobacco or rice that was recently stained by the history of slavery. Orange carried this sense of optimism, a kind of new promise and possibility, especially for the people who worked in the industry. This industry relied and was made possible by the labor of Black Floridians. And so while Northerners, albeit totally patronizingly and condescendingly, they feel like they're moving to the South, helping newly freed African Americans become civilized citizens by hiring them on their orange groves. Despite this, the orange industry does seem to be more benevolent and more democratic in a way than other Southern food industries. Now that is evident with Harriet Beecher Stowe. You might all know Stowe more famously as loudspoken abolitionist. She's also best-selling author of Uncle Tom's Cabin. Stowe also owned her own orange grove, which I think is so cool. I mean, for most of the 1800s, women weren't allowed to own land. So not only is Stowe owning land, she has a successful orange grove business, and she even creates her own orange crate label. So she's advertising her products. She's hiring newly freed, newly emancipated African Americans on her grove, and she's also painting representations of Florida oranges. She's painting still lifes of Florida fruits and flowers, and some of them, she's selling them to accumulate money to donate to Black churches and Black schools in the South. So oranges, in my mind, is this really exciting intersection. Art, oranges, and Reconstruction make up this intersection that again declares how fruit was used to help shape the country and help further national expansion. I also really tried to recover the histories of women in this chapter and in all of my book, because the way in which women shaped the empire has been so historically overlooked and neglected. But women are doing it, and they're doing it with their authorities over food and the home. And so women were not only painting still lifes like this depiction of oranges, but they're also incorporating the Florida orange into mainstream American homes. I found cookbook recipes for Florida orange cake, Florida orange marmalade, Florida orange wine. Women most likely were also purchasing these quirky souvenir sets that I love. We're looking at saucers and cups and plates that are mimicking the dimpled rind of the citrus fruit. They're branded with the word Florida in Black letters across every surface. And so it's women who are displaying these in the dining room and in the parlor. And so I think about this in terms of the larger culture of Reconstruction. How is the South being folded back into the Union? Well, it's literally being folded into American recipes and American dining rooms, and it's women who are doing that. I also wanted to insert this picture because this is in the permanent collection of PAFA, Strawberries and Cherries by Margaretta Peel. It's not in my book, but it's a great example of how I want to urge scholars to more seriously consider women painters, women still life painters, and that we also need to think about how they are painting foods very deliberately, knowing where these foods are being grown, knowing how these foods might be produced on contested landscapes. And this is a way to fold women into scholarship and thinking about how women still life painters were also shaping the Union. For so much of the 1800s, women were prohibited from entering academies, from entering training grounds. Many of them were discouraged from taking life drawing classes. And so food was one of the most accessible objects for women artists. And so while male still life artists get so much attention in our textbooks, it's really women who contributed substantially to the still life genre. And again, considering how they're using food in very deliberate ways to also contribute to national attitudes about the United States. Returning to the orange industry, I mentioned that it was a more inclusive business. And so it not only includes women, but also Black Floridians. We're looking at a photograph by William Henry Jackson, who shows this lush tropical landscape, Black men in the foreground, picking the fruit, packaging it, crating it. And this depiction shows Black Floridian laborers with a lot of integrity and dignity and how they helped shape this industry. And sadly, this was kind of unusual for the time period. This goes against the grain of most images that showed terribly racist and caricatured depictions, which leads to my third chapter on the watermelon. I feel like I need to always include a trigger warning here because this is definitely the darkest chapter that I had to research and write. This has really disturbing material that I kind of had an ethical debate with myself about whether or not to include in my book, whether or not to include in presentations like today. But at the end, I found and I concluded that I think it's urgent that we confront a lot of these racist images because I find that a lot of my readers don't actually know about the watermelon stereotype and these racist images incorporating the watermelon. And also there's a lot of misinformation about the stereotype. Many people believe that it emerged in the 1900s, and that's not true. It comes about in the 1800s, and it is a declaration of this cruel, nasty stereotype claiming that African-American people had this insatiable lust for watermelon. So I can show you thousands upon thousands of these images. I mean, every archive I visited had the racist watermelon trope within their archival shelves. That this stereotype, I use this word in my classes when I teach the watermelon trope, it was relentless. Okay, there's no surface that it didn't touch. I found trade cards, photographs, paintings that were for more exclusive elite audiences. There's no kind of visual medium that the watermelon stereotype was not included in. And furthermore, it was so ubiquitous that I found it in advertisements and paintings as far as California and Hawaii. Okay, so that's why I deliberately used the word relentless here because it was ubiquitous, it was pervasive, and it was like dangerously widely circulating in this time period. So what was it meant to do? This racist stereotype develops in the Reconstruction years after African Americans have gained civil rights and more civil liberties with emancipation and the closing of the Civil War. But these images are not meant to honor that. They're meant to reverse that. They are designed to claim that African Americans are an inferior, a savage race, a race of people that can never become, quote, proper citizens. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I can show you thousands and thousands of these horrible, atrocious images. It is way more rewarding and much more fun for me to show you how artists were challenging this stereotype and how artists were combating this trope. So let's think about it in the context of Charles Ethan Porter. Porter's an African-American artist in the 1800s. He surely would have had to overcome several obstacles to gain a training or recognition as a fine artist. He was the first Black member of the National Academy of Design. And he manages to have a long still life career. So if any of you have seen a Porter painting, They're beautiful. They generally show vases of flowers, bowls of fruit on quiet, peaceful dining room tables. They often have this kind of sweet impressionistic lighting. Now, over Porter's long career, he only paints watermelon twice. Okay, he's a Black artist who only paints watermelon twice. Now, watermelon was a very exciting fruit for still life painters because it was a great object to experiment with form and texture and lighting, right? Watermelon has that beautifully glassy surface. It has a reflectiveness. It has this meaty interior. So many still life artists, took inspiration in the watermelon. Porter only paints it twice. And to me, that is really revealing because you have to imagine, why would a Black artist want to paint watermelon? It is such a racially charged fruit. It is a fruit that in the 1800s was inseparable from the stereotype. Like, you could not divorce watermelon from the racist stereotype that was so pervasive. And so it must have been very challenging for Black artists to negotiate this fruit that had been attached to such a disgusting and revolting stereotype about their culture. So he paints it only twice. And also notice the treatment of the watermelon in his painting. So I had described to you that most of his still lifes are these like polite dining room paintings. We have this soft impressionistic lighting. That's not really present here. In Broken Watermelon, we don't see a dining room table. He's placed it outdoors on the ground, ravaged. There's a level of violence in this watermelon painting that I think is uncharacteristic of his other works. We see the watermelon torn apart, broken into chunks, ravaged on the ground. We have these white seeds that look like they're knocked out like a person's teeth. We have this looming shadow on the left, which imposes a kind of like threatening presence. And so I wondered about the level of violence in Porter's painting and if it might be, to any degree, a commentary on Black violence in this time period. This is in the Jim Crow period. This is after Reconstruction, when all of those laws are reversed. And while I risk, and I don't want to, but I risk overreading the race of the artist into this painting, I think it's something that we really need to grapple with and consider, because other artists were also using the still life genre to wrestle with topics that would have been too controversial to depict more overtly. So racial violence, sexual violence, the still life genre was really useful in that way for abstracting something that was more delicate to talk about. And so I'm happy to talk more about Porter and this painting if anyone has questions. And I also bring this chapter into a more contemporary time period with artists like Carrie Mae Weems. She has this photograph from the 80s called Black Man Holding Watermelon. And that's exactly what we're seeing, right? A Black man holding the fruit, but notice how the fruit is uncut. Okay, so she's refusing to open up this fruit to conversations of the past. And also, by refusing to open up the fruit and slice it or cut it, she also rejects the stereotype in which we see Black people hoarding the fruit, stealing the fruit, drooling over the fruit in advertisements, paintings, and photographs. Or like in this trade card advertisement, a person so obsessed with fruit that his whole head has morphed and transformed into the watermelon. He has this smile, this caricatured smile that stretches across the picture plane, mimicking the crescent shape of the watermelon. This is exactly what Weems is working against, right? She shows a man with dignity, integrity, with control over his body, control over his emotions. And what I love best about this photograph is that she shows us the backdrop. She doesn't make it an illusion. She points our attention to the wrinkles of this backdrop, to the windows perhaps in her studio. This to me signals that she is reminding us how images of watermelon in the past have been so carefully staged, right? That they're fictions. They are deliberately crafted and manufactured, and that artists like Weems today are trying to expose and unravel a lot of these nasty and cruel images from the past. This takes us into our fourth chapter on the banana, and this book is also loosely organized chronologically. So the banana chapter takes readers into the early 20th century, because unlike the watermelon, which was widely accessible, kind of mainstream fruit, the banana for most of the 1800s was considered to be pretty exotic. The banana was even discussed in this time period as an immigrant fruit, a fruit that was imported to the United States, mostly from Central America and the Caribbean. And so we're looking at a painting by John George Brown, and it's a sweet depiction of a boy holding the fruit. He looks to be excited. He's smiling at this fruit that probably was really expensive to purchase. And notice that he holds the fruit upside down. Okay, so the nub of that fruit is pointed downward, where normally we fold it the other way and then we peel it. So this record of kind of an early encounter with the fruit is also documenting some of our first exchanges in the United States with this banana and how unfamiliar people were with the exotic banana. I read a lot of stories and tales about how Americans mistook bananas for other foods. So there's one article I read about how one person thought they were eating a sausage and it ended up being a banana. And that might seem really strange to us. Like, how do you mistake a banana for a sausage? But we have to remember that in the 1800s, they were eating the Gros Michel banana, which is a thicker, chunkier, fatter banana than the slender Cavendish banana that we eat today. And apparently the Gros Michel banana is way more delicious than the Cavendish. So I've always wanted to get my hands on one. I think it's become extinct, so I don't know how possible that is. But that explains why maybe this banana has a kind of chunkier aesthetic than the one we eat today. When Americans did get exposure and access to the banana, they were really excited about it. They really enjoyed its taste, and they also invented all of these new tools around the banana. So we see the invention of banana stands, banana boats, banana pedestals, banana knives. These were all new tools and devices invented in the 1800s to eat the banana. So this is a way of incorporating this exotic fruit that's coming from the tropics into American homes. And another way that women, again, are doing this, right? Women are displaying them in the dining room on a banana boat. Women are folding the banana into still life paintings that they're displaying in the home. And I'll also tell you that in some ways, there's almost like a more sinister bend to the banana boat, because one of the reasons why they're also doing and creating these pedestals is to distance American rituals of eating the banana from the way that it's eaten in the quote, lazy tropics. Okay, so there are a lot of people who talk about how people in the lazy tropics eat the banana, that all they have to do in Latin America is roll off their hammock, pluck the fruit from a tree and eat it. Americans don't want to do that. They want to create a more sophisticated and civilized way of eating the banana in their minds. And so they invent all of these silverware tools and banana pedestals and baking bananas into salads and pies and desserts. This is a way of civilizing the banana and again, distancing it from the way that it's eaten in other countries. So the banana does not become more accessible until the early 1900s with companies like the United Fruit Company. And the United Fruit Company is very savvy visually, okay? They know that one of the best ways to sell their product is through visual images. And so they spend a lot of time creating these colorful illustrations on their cookbooks and in their advertisements and in brochures. And so we're looking at here the cover of a cookbook illustration. It's one of their first cookbooks from 1904. And I can give like a whole separate talk just about this one image. But for today's purposes, I actually want to think about what you don't see in this image and what you don't see in their cookbooks and their advertisements, which is the ruthless politics of the United Fruit Company that has been rendered invisible and is purposely obscured from their advertisements. I don't know how many of you are familiar with United Fruit, but they went to extreme and violent lengths to protect their enterprise. So in the places where they set down banana groves in areas of Central America and the Caribbean, they treated workers terribly. was like pure exploitation. They also kicked indigenous people off their land and stole land from local farmers. They also created so much environmental damage, contaminating waterways and killing the environment to create transportation systems for the importation of the banana. And furthermore, they even created coups that are supported by the CIA, intervening in Latin American politics over and over and over again to try to control every political artery that they could to make the most profit from the importation of the banana. So let me repeat that again in case you're not familiar with the banana wars, that this company is supported by the CIA in this political intervention in all of these different countries throughout the 1900s. And you would never know that from these sweet advertisements and cookbook illustrations that are trying to assimilate the Latin American banana into the American mainstream. Now, while their images might not be pointing to that reality, artists today are certainly wrestling with the stained and tainted legacy of United Fruit and of American intervention in Latin America through the banana. We're looking at an image by Moises Barrios. So he's a contemporary artist in Guatemala. And if you can see the book behind me, my book, the cover of my book has another painting by Barrios, who was so generous to lend that to me. Barrios has an interesting method. He's really inspired by Banana Republic clothing stores. Okay, so he paints the display windows, the mannequins, the clothing from Banana Republic stores as a way to urge us to confront, why do we have this clothing company named after Banana Republic, which, by the way, alone, the word Banana Republic is a racial slur. Banana Republic is a derogatory term that characterizes countries by corruption and political instability. So already, we're on uneven footing here, that we're using this term, a racial slur, for a clothing company. But he's also encouraging us to think about, why do we glamorize banana republics in the United States? Something that has caused so much environmental wreckage, political damage, that's something that has advanced indigenous removal. Like, this is not something that we should romanticize. He also shows a person actually selling bananas in the reflection of that clothing store window. Again, helping us think about who's visible in this field, who's invisible, right? How do we wear the banana? How do we eat the banana without maybe thinking about who's producing the banana or who's selling it? And so Barrios is one of many artists today who are grappling with the history of US intervention in Latin America through these banana wars. That leads me into my last and fifth chapter on the Hawaiian pineapple, because as you get deeper into the 20th century, you start to see the corporatization of fruit. So like United Fruit Company, we have another company emerge in the 1900s, and that's the Dole Hawaiian Pineapple Company. And like United Fruit, they are very visually savvy. So they're using World's Fair venues, they're using advertisements and brochures to sell American consumers on the Hawaiian pineapple. And I love this image, which is from the Alaska Yukon World's Fair. It's the Hawaiian exhibit. And we see like a 2-story pineapple sculpture made up of individual little pineapples. And World's Fairs were like the most perfect place to advertise food, because not just showcasing technological and cultural innovations, they showcased culinary innovations. And it's at World's Fairs where many foods were first introduced, like at the Columbian Expo. I think it was Aunt Jemima pancake flour and ketchup, Heinz ketchup, was first introduced. So that's why World's Fair venues necessitate a lot of my attention in this book. Now, Dole was also really savvy because the company did something that was pretty pioneering in the 1930s. They got famous, well-known artists to help them with their brand campaigns. And this is something that we're absolutely used to today, right? We're used to seeing artists or celebrities work with advertising companies or work with, companies to campaign and advertise their product. But this was pretty new in the 1930s and 40s. And so Dole was kind of ahead of its time in that way. And they are able to get assistance from Georgia OKeefe, who was a well-known, a famous artist by this time period. And they sent her to Hawaii for 2 months, commissioning her to paint a pineapple for their advertisements, for advertisements promoting pineapple juice. Now, let me tell you the story really briefly about what happens when OKeefe gets to Hawaii. She's there for, I think, a little bit over 2 months. And while she's there, she requests to stay on a pineapple plantation. The company rejects her request. They say no, probably because they don't want her to see how their workers are treated. It was pretty dismal. Workers at this time period were protesting and asking for something as simple as a weekend off. And so the company says no. And it's rumored that OKeefe is pretty bitter about this rejection, and she leaves Hawaii without ever painting a single pineapple. Not only does she not paint a pineapple, she leaves Hawaii painting a papaya, which is Dole's rival. Okay, so eventually the company ekes out a pineapple painting from her. They ship a budding pineapple on a Pan Am clipper to her penthouse apartment in New York City. And this is the depiction that she's created. So it's this pineapple emerging from these huge striating leaves that show her characteristic trademark abstract style. And they tack on this vignette of like a white Aryan family enjoying pineapple juice. And so at the end, Dole got what they needed. But I think it's important to tell that story because it shows you that there are nuances to these relationships, right? It's not like all these images are just celebrating American commercial expansion. It's not like all these images are uniformly or monolithically celebrating national expansion. They're not. There are shades of gray. There are nuances to some of these relationships that show different shades of resistance. And I certainly don't mean to portray OKeefe as a resistor. She wasn't that, but there's a little discomfort behind the way some of these images were produced. And again, those relationships between the company, the fruit company, and the image maker. Now, this is the last image I'll show you from the book, because as you get into the 1940s and 50s, the relationship between art, fruit, and empire becomes the most explicit in my mind. Leaders of the Hawaiian Pineapple Company were working directly with artists and photographers and congressmen to try to lobby for Hawaiian statehood. They're using images of the pineapple to lobby and campaign for Hawaii to become the 50th state of the Union. Why are they doing this? They create a whole Hawaiian statehood commission using artists and pineapple companies to try to sell Hawaii to mainland Americans as this friendly and tropical accessory to the United States, as something that is worthy of being a 50th state in the Union. Many of these images, in I guess a sense, were warranted, you could say, because there were a lot of Americans and also a lot of Hawaiians who didn't want incorporation. There were some Southern politicians who felt that Hawaiians could never become proper citizens, that Hawaiians were too racially diverse, that they were too culturally incompatible, and so Hawaiian incorporation would never make sense. And so what does the Statehood Commission do? With the help of the Hawaiian Pineapple companies and artists and photographers, they show Hawaiian people as friendly. They show Hawaiian people as civilized. They show Hawaiian people like this woman with a pineapple badge tacked to her sleeve, a pin in her hair of a pineapple. She's bowing down almost in reverence to this Dole Hawaiian pineapple water tank to proclaim that Hawaiians were not only ready for citizenship, more importantly, this image showed that Hawaiians would show an allegiance to American businesses. So this book is really all about the kind of commercial expansion, national expansion, racial formation of the United States, and how images of fruit were not just decorative objects that one would place, above their sofa in their dining room, that they were really racially loaded, and they pressed upon these unique conversations and these heated debates over the formation of the American empire. Before we go to Q&A, let me briefly tell you that if you are so inclined to purchase my book, please do so using this discount code. Like, it hurts my heart how expensive academic books are. I think this retails for like $65. So I encourage you to use this discount code if you feel so moved to purchase this book. And also know that all of my royalties are being donated to the Coalition of Immokalee Workers. So this is a farm workers civil rights organization that helps advocate for better conditions for the people who farm and harvest our food. And so all royalties, all proceeds for my book are going to the CIW. A few other things. If you want to keep in touch with me, a good way is to follow me on Instagram. I have a tag that @thefruitsofempire. Once a week, I post a depiction of food and art, and I kind of analyze it. So that's a fun way to keep in touch. And then one last image I'll show you just to give you a hint of what my next research project is. And maybe Monica and Anna, I can come back and eventually talk about my next research topic, which continues to live in the food studies world. I'm really interested in milk, specifically in breast milk. And so I've become fascinated with Victorian images of women breastfeeding and nursing. So if anyone's interested in that, happy to chat about that too. Thanks so much for listening.
Wow. I don't know about the rest of you, but my mind is a little bit blown right now, and I'm trying to figure out where to even start.
A little overwhelming, I know.
Well, also the phrase "a more civilized banana" is not going to leave my brain anytime soon. I'm still wrestling with that one. But while folks sort of gather themselves to decide if they have their own specific questions, can I ask you a really high level question? Just sort of up here.
Yeah.
How did you, an art historian, like find your way to this particular intersection originally? Like, was there a moment? Was there a painting where you want to, like, how did you come to this place? It's fascinating.
Yeah. So my origin story is that really my book is like a love letter to my graduate program. I'm really proud to come from the University of New Mexico. And it has the most unique and pioneering program in Latin American art history, African American art history. I believe my advisor, Kirsten Buick, gave a PAFA talk not too long ago. And so I'm really proud to come from this program where I took a class on Central American art history, which is like rarely taught in the United States. And it was in this class that my professor, Dr. Craven, exposed me to the work of Moises Barrios, who produced those banana images I showed. And it just got me thinking like, oh, food is really political. Like I never really thought about that. Like I have the luxury to not think about how food's so political. And my interest was in 19th century American art. And so I started wondering like, when does the banana even enter American paintings? And once I started seeing the politics of food in the 1800s in American art, I couldn't unsee it. It was just like my glasses had been taken off, and I just started to recognize how these images of food were not only some of the earliest documentations that we have of people encountering these foods, but that they're also happening at the same time that American businesses and the government is trying to colonize the places where these foods are grown. And so it was all because of this one class I took on Central American art history.
Wow. Okay. It's a great shout out to your alma mater, by the way.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Go for it.
Oh no, you look like
Yeah, I don't know,
Anna.
Anna. If you have to.
I'm sorry, I was late, Shana. I'm so thrilled that you're speaking here. And you know, I've been following your work for a while. So I'm really excited about your new project. You know, originally we were thinking about the Women in Motion show being up and thinking about particularly Bessie Potter-Vano, who is in our exhibition. Alas, don't have a breastfeeding image in that exhibition because, you know, it's not quite as common as, it's certainly not as common in the 19th century as it is today. But I was really struck by you talking about women artists' use of still life as, you know, a place, first of all, economically expedient for them to work in,
Certainly.
but also a place for them to innovate. And you know, when at PAFA, in the first annual exhibition in 1811, Margaret Angelica Peel showed her still lifes. And then we also have a number of Georgia O'Keeffe still lifes in the show. And I think people tend to sort of make Georgia O'Keeffe stand for all women artists and and suggest that her paintings are somehow not part of the still life tradition. When clearly, I think your argument about the pineapple and its uses, but then also hearkening back to the 18th and 19th century. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about women still life painters in particular, and what kind of innovative work you've seen that they did over the course of that time period from the early 19th to the early 20th centuries.
Yeah, Anna, that is like such a brilliant statement. And I hadn't even considered that. You're right. No one talks about O'Keeffe as a still life painter. It's almost like the still life label is a demotion for her, as if it's something too domestic. It's a dining room genre that would lessen the quality or the cerebral intelligence of her work. And so you're right, that is really purposeful. And I hadn't ever considered that before. And you're right that I hope I'm also asserting that there's agency and empowerment in painting still lifes by women. If women are not allowed to draw the nude figure, for instance, how might they have been using the freckles of a strawberry or the curve of a lemon to depict nipples and bodies? I think that food was not only the most accessible, it's something that was also maybe inexpensive, and it didn't move, and it allowed them to really practice and exercise their talent. It was also a way to practice the human figure and to excel in some of the genres that had been prohibited to them. And so, yeah, I want to reinsert the agency of a woman depicting still lifes, and also just reinserting women into the canon, where they deserve to be.
And I shared some watermelon images with you by African-American artists in the chat, which I'm sure you can get from Monica. But okay. Monica, I'm thinking of a work from the Lee Alter collection that is a sort of contemporary artist. Is it by Julie Heffernan? Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I know the one you're talking about. Yes, I think you're right. Let me pull it up for everybody.
Yeah, I think that would be a particular work that you'd be interested in, just as like a more contemporary woman feminist artist who's taking on the still life genre and doing some, if you look closely at it, doing some crazy things with it.
Well, so I haven't seen the image yet, but I imagine, fruits are very sexualized. Like they naturally kind of lend themselves to a sexual language. Like there are depictions that are pretty explicit in the 1800s of watermelon standing in for breasts and bananas being a very phallic symbol. And so, painters are even like literally using the food as gestures to the human body.
Okay, I've asked enough questions now. So let's see if any of our other audience members want to. Oh, and it looks like Monica just shared the piece.
Okay.
I did. I just shared the link to the piece in our collection, which you'll all be able to see if you zoom in nice and close. It's a very interesting update of the still life. You can investigate.
I saw that somebody had asked for the link for where to get the book, and Monica nicely popped that into the chat.
Okay, terrific. And anyone email me, I'll throw my email address if they need the discount code and whatnot.
That's great. And we do have one question that I think is useful in the Q&A. It starts with a compliment, how much they love your topic. But then goes on to ask if you found any works by Indigenous artists that also take on food or food scarcity specifically in the way that they approach this topic.
Yeah, thanks for the compliment and also for the brilliant question. So sadly, like Indigenous food histories don't really make it into my book so much as the idea of a lot of this land being historically stolen from Indigenous people. I mentioned that in my book, and talking about how the lands where these fruits were grown were a product of that theft. But where I do talk about Indigenous food sovereignty is in the classroom. I teach a grad seminar on Native American art history, and we talk a lot about how organizations today are really aligned with the mission of food justice and food sovereignty and trying to recover Indigenous foodways and preserve them, and also empowering Native American people to reclaim and repatriate seeds and foods that have been stolen from them and that are being archived. I mean, I learned about this very recently, that there are seeds that were stolen and have been archived in libraries that need to be repatriated. So it's not just food justice, but food repatriation. So in this mission to preserve, but also to maintain ancestral traditions with Indigenous foodways. It's a topic I talk about in my class, sadly not so much in my book.
Interesting. I have a small question too, just a factual check. Was that a painting by Harriet Beecher Stowe?
Yes.
That you showed? So Harriet Beecher Stowe, in addition to everything else, was also a pretty skilled painter.
So isn't that mind-blowing, Monica? Like, everyone wants to talk about her books and her abolitionist career. She also was a painter, and she took it kind of seriously. She had a tutor come every day, and you know, she really worked on her skill, albeit like she's not the most gifted painter, but she was on the board of museums, and she disseminated her representations to friends and family members. And so that's also why that orange chapter is so cool in my mind, because it recovers Stowe as an artist, which no one considers.
Oh, that's amazing. Somebody wants to know if she was any good at the business side of things. Was she savvy at all?
You know, she
as an orchard owner.
Yeah, right. I don't know how truthful she was, because she wrote Palmetto Leaves, which was like a series of articles that were originally published in the Christian Union newspaper. And in that journal, all she does is flaunt the kind of profits and accomplishments of her orange grove. She's doing this to get more Northerners to migrate south and help transform and rehabilitate the South in the years of Reconstruction. And so my gut is to think that maybe she was exaggerating about like how profitable her orange grove really was, but she had only glowing things to say about the industry.
Okay, interesting. Well, we've gotten very close to the end of our hour. I think we've gotten through every question that was in the chat.
Okay.
And I just want to say on behalf of everybody on this call, thank you for being both a great speaker, having an interesting topic, and surprising me with what you told us today. I think any talk where I have like all of the things I have to go home and tell someone else immediately written down on a piece of paper, that's a good way to spend an afternoon, right? So I hope everybody else feels the same way. I'm guessing from reviewing the chat that they do. I would like to just go on record as welcoming you back for whenever you're ready for that next talk. We are ready for you.
Okay, I'll take you to that offer. I will follow up.
Wonderful. And everybody else, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you for coming. If you want to share this information or this experience with others, look for it on YouTube, and somewhere between 36 and 72 hours from now. It's about how long it takes us to upload.
We'll see you all in 2022, right, Monica?
Yes, we will.
For the next iteration of Art at Noon. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.